Clara Whitmore stood in the town square, watching the man who was supposed to marry her turn his back and walk away. "Too refined for this life," he'd announced loudly, making sure everyone heard. "Too delicate. Too good." The words hung in the dusty air like accusations. Around her, townspeople stared, some pitying, most judging. Her trunk sat in the dirt beside her, everything she owned reduced to one battered case and zero prospects. She had no money for the return journey, no family waiting, no plan beyond this moment. She'd followed every rule, done everything right, and still ended up with nothing. Welcome to a story about what happens when perfection becomes your prison. If you've ever felt punished for being yourself, this one's for you. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's see what happens when a woman with nothing left to lose finds something worth fighting for. The stagecoach had deposited Clara in front of the general store at precisely 2 o'clock, just as the telegram had specified. She'd smoothed her traveling dress, the good wool one she'd saved for this exact occasion, and checked her reflection in the stage window. Presentable, proper, everything a prospective bride should be. She hadn't expected a crowd, but there they were, at least 20 people gathered in clusters along the wooden sidewalk, pretending to conduct business while their eyes tracked her every movement. Women in faded calico whispered behind their hands. Men in dusty work clothes leaned against porch posts, arms crossed, watching. Even the children had stopped playing to stare. Thomas Brennan emerged from the store with the confidence of a man accustomed to being watched. He was taller than Clara had imagined from his letters, broader through the shoulders, with sun-weathered skin and eyes that swept over her with the same appraising look she'd seen livestock dealers use at market. "Miss Whitmore?" His voice carried across the square, formal and cold. "Mr. Brennan?" Clara descended the stage steps carefully, acutely aware of the audience. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person." He didn't move to help with her trunk, didn't smile, didn't offer his hand. Instead, he circled her slowly, and Clara felt her cheeks burn as the townspeople watched this inspection. She stood perfectly still, chin level, hands clasped at her waist the way her mother had taught her. Proper posture, dignified bearing, all the things that were supposed to matter. "You're not what I expected," Thomas said finally. Clara's stomach tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "Your letters said you wanted an educated woman, someone capable of teaching your daughters." I said capable. I didn't say." He gestured vaguely at her dress, her posture, her very existence. "This." "I don't understand." "You're too refined." He pronounced it like a fault. "Look at you. That dress probably costs more than most folks here make in a month. Your hands are soft. You stand like you've never done a day's real work in your life." "I assure you, Mr. Brennan, I'm quite capable of..." "Of what? Needlepoint, piano, poetry reading?" He turned to address the crowd now, playing to them. "I need a woman who can survive out here, not a hothouse flower that'll wilt at the first hard wind." Laughter rippled through the watching townspeople. Clara felt it like a physical blow. "I came 1,000 miles based on your proposal," she said quietly. "Your letters never suggested..." "My letters were written before I knew what you were." Thomas pulled an envelope from his pocket. One of hers. She recognized the lilac paper she'd chosen so carefully. He held it up like evidence. "All this fancy stationery, these perfect sentences. Should have known then you'd be trouble." "Trouble?" The word came out sharper than Clara intended. "I've done nothing but honor every agreement we made." The agreement was for a wife who could handle frontier life. Look at yourself. His gesture encompassed everything about her. Her carefully styled hair, her proper dress, her mortified expression. "You're too good for this place. Too delicate. Too..." He searched for the word. "Too much. Too much." Clara had heard that before, from suitors back east who wanted sweetness without opinions, beauty without intelligence, femininity without strength. She'd thought the frontier would be different. Thomas's letters had suggested a man who valued capability and education, who wanted a partner rather than an ornament. She'd been catastrophically wrong. "I'll return your travel expenses," Thomas said, though his tone suggested this concession came reluctantly. "Can't have it said I'm not a gentleman." But this arrangement won't work. You're not suited for this life, and I'll not have my daughters learning to be useless decoration." Useless? Claire's voice failed her. Around the square, the watching crowd had grown larger. More women emerging from shops, more men pausing mid-task, all of them witnessing her humiliation. "The next stage east doesn't run until next week," Thomas continued matter-of-factly. "You can wait at the boarding house. I'll settle your bill." "I don't want—" "What you want stopped mattering when you stepped off that stage looking like something out of a fancy catalog." He finally met her eyes, and Clara saw no cruelty there, just certainty. Absolute conviction that he was making the right choice. "Go back east, Miss Whitmore. Find some banker or lawyer who'll appreciate all that refinement. Out here, it'll just get you killed." He turned and walked away. Just like that. Their correspondence, their arrangement, her entire future, dismissed in less than 5 minutes. Clara stood frozen as the crowd began to disperse. Some looked sympathetic. Most looked satisfied, as though her rejection confirmed something they'd suspected all along. The women gathered in tight clusters, already weaving this story into whatever narrative suited them. The men returned to their business with the casual indifference of those witnessing familiar entertainment. She was alone in the town square with her trunk and 0 prospects. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. Clara's wool dress, so appropriate for the journey, felt suffocating now. Sweat trickled down her spine. Her carefully pinned hair felt too heavy, too elaborate for this place that had already deemed her too much. She sat down on her trunk because standing seemed pointless and her legs had started shaking. Think. She needed to think. Her reticule contained exactly $4.30. The cost of a week's boarding would consume most of that. The stage fare back east would require at least $20, money she didn't have and couldn't earn in a week, even if employment existed for a woman the town had just watched being publicly rejected. Clara pulled off her gloves, finger by finger. Her hands were smooth, just as Thomas had observed. No calluses. No scars. Evidence of a life spent doing the wrong things well. She'd been educated by a governess, taught French and watercolors and all the accomplishments that made a young woman marriageable in Philadelphia society. When her parents died, leaving debts instead of inheritance, those accomplishments had proven spectacularly useless. The relatives who'd taken her in made their charity clear. She was a burden, a reminder of her father's poor judgment and her mother's expensive tastes. She'd answered Thomas's advertisement because it had seemed like escape, a chance to use her education teaching his daughters, a chance to be valued for her capabilities rather than judged for her circumstances. Instead, she'd traveled 1,000 miles to discover that everything about her was wrong. The sun climbed higher, Clara's throat felt parched, but she couldn't quite summon the energy to seek water. Around her, the town conducted its business. Wagons rattled past. Men shouted greetings to each other. Somewhere a dog barked. Life continued, completely indifferent to her disaster. She must have sat there for an hour before the dizziness started. When had she last eaten? Breakfast, before dawn, a dry biscuit saved from yesterday's dinner. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but the thought of walking into a store, of facing more stares and whispers, felt impossible. The boarding house. Thomas had mentioned the boarding house. Clara tried to stand, but the world tilted dangerously. She sat back down hard, breathing carefully through her nose until the spinning stopped. "You all right, miss?" An older woman stood a few feet away, flour dusting her apron. Her face was weathered but kind, curiosity mixing with genuine concern. "I'm fine, thank you." Claire's voice came out steady, despite everything, proper manners, automatic as breathing. "You don't look fine. You look about ready to faint." The woman moved closer, lowering her voice. "Thomas Brennan's a fool, if you want my opinion, which nobody asked for, but I'm giving it anyway. He's entitled to his choice." "Choice," the woman snorted. "Man writes letters asking for an educated woman, then acts shocked when she shows up educated. That's not choice, honey. That's just stupid." She glanced around, then added quietly, "I'm Martha. I run the cafe. You should come get something to eat before you collapse." "I don't have—" Clara stopped, humiliation burning fresh. "Mr. Brennan said he'd settle my boarding house bill, but I don't know if that extends to— I wasn't planning to charge you." Martha's tone was brisk. Call it Christian charity or female solidarity or just me being contrary. Come on. Clara let herself be helped up, let Martha guide her across the square to a small establishment with Martha's Cafe painted on the window. Inside, it was blessedly cool and mercifully empty. Martha settled Clara at a corner table and disappeared into the kitchen. She returned with water, bread, and a bowl of soup that smelled like heaven. "Eat slowly," Martha instructed. "You look half-starved." Clara obeyed, taking small sips of soup, letting the warmth settle her stomach. Martha busied herself wiping tables that looked already clean, giving Clara privacy to compose herself. "How long you been traveling?" Martha asked eventually. 3 weeks. Train to Omaha, then the stage. Clara broke off a piece of bread. It seemed romantic in the planning, an adventure. And now? Now it seems like profound stupidity. Martha laughed, sharp and surprised. "Well, at least you're honest." She sat down across from Clara. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." The admission felt like failure. "Return east, I suppose. Though I'm not certain how. I don't have the fare. Could wire for money." "There's no one to wire." Clara met Martha's eyes. "That's why I answered the advertisement. I have no family, no prospects." Thomas's offer seemed like an answer. "But you're educated, surely." "Education is ornamental when you're female," Clara said quietly. "It makes you suitable for marriage or teaching young children. I tried for teaching positions back east. There were 40 applicants for every opening, and I had no connections to recommend me." She took another careful spoonful of soup. Thomas's letters spoke of his daughters needing education, of wanting someone who valued learning. It seemed perfect. Until you didn't fit his picture of what a frontier wife should look like. Apparently. Clara studied her soup bowl. "I should have known. Every letter I sent, I was honest about my background, my education." He responded enthusiastically. "I thought—" She trailed off. "You thought honesty mattered." "Foolish, wasn't it?" Martha reached across the table and squeezed Clara's hand briefly. "Not foolish, just optimistic." She stood. "Eat, rest, we'll figure something out." But as the afternoon wore on and Clara's strength slowly returned, no solutions emerged. Martha let her stay in the cafe, keeping her cup filled with water, occasionally bringing more bread. Other customers came and went, some staring openly, others pretending not to notice the rejected bride hiding in the corner. As the sun began its descent, painting the dusty street gold and amber, Clara forced herself to face facts. She had nowhere to go, no money for passage, no skills this town valued. She could throw herself on Martha's mercy, but charity had limits, and Clara had already imposed enough. She was carrying her cup to the kitchen, intending to thank Martha and figure out where exactly the boarding house was located when the dizziness returned with a vengeance. The floor rushed up to meet her. Clara had a confused impression of Martha shouting, of strong hands catching her before she hit the ground, of being carried, actually carried, like she weighed nothing. Then darkness and blessed relief from having to solve impossible problems. When Clara woke, she was lying on something soft. A bed. Real sheets, clean and sun-smelling. Sunlight streamed through a window, wrong angle for evening, which meant morning. She'd lost an entire night. Clara sat up carefully. Her head ached, but the dizziness had passed. She was in a small, neat room, whitewashed walls, simple furniture. Her dress had been loosened but not removed, someone's concession to modesty. The door opened and Martha appeared carrying a tray. "Oh good, you're awake, was starting to worry. What happened?" "You fainted dead away in my cafe, scared me half to death." Martha set the tray on a small table, more bread, some eggs, coffee. "Jonah carried you upstairs. You've been asleep for 16 hours. "Jonah?" "Jonah Hale. Has a ranch about 5 miles out. Comes into town for supplies every few weeks." Martha busied herself arranging the food. "Quiet sort. Keeps to himself mostly. But he was there when you dropped, and he got you upstairs before you cracked your head open, so I'm counting that as providential." Clara's face burned. "I've imposed terribly on everyone. You've been half-starved and exhausted and humiliated in front of half the town. I'd say a faint was the least dramatic thing you could have done." Martha pushed the tray closer. "Eat. Then we'll talk about what comes next." But Clara couldn't quite focus on the food. "Where's my trunk?" "Still at the store. Thomas had it moved to the boarding house, but when you didn't show up, Mrs. Henley brought it back to the general store. Figured you'd collect it eventually. Martha's expression turned sour. Woman's got all the warmth of a winter outhouse. I need to... Clara tried to stand, but Martha pressed her back down. You need to eat and get your strength back. Then we'll worry about trunks and boarding houses and whatever else. Martha headed for the door, then paused. Jonah's downstairs. Waited all night to make sure you were all right. Might want to thank him when you're decent. She left before Clara could formulate a response. Clara ate mechanically, her mind churning. A strange man had carried her unconscious body, had seen her vulnerable, helpless. The humiliation felt crushing, but underneath it was something else. Confusion. Why would a stranger care enough to wait all night? She used the water pitcher to wash her face and hands, did what she could to tidy her hair without proper pins or a mirror. Her reflection in the window glass showed a woman who looked exactly like what she was, exhausted, uncertain, completely out of her depth. Downstairs, Martha's cafe was doing morning business. Several customers occupied tables, eating breakfast and conducting low-voiced conversations that stopped when Clara appeared. A man sat alone at the corner table where Clara had spent yesterday afternoon. He was perhaps 35, with the kind of weathered face that came from years of outdoor work. Tall even sitting down, broad-shouldered, wearing work clothes that had seen better days but were scrupulously clean. His hair needed cutting and his jaw needed shaving, but his hands, wrapped around a coffee cup, were steady and patient. He looked up when Clara approached, and she was struck by his eyes. Gray, like winter sky, and completely calm. No judgment there. No curiosity. Just quiet attention. Mr. Hale? Clara kept her voice steady. I understand I owe you thanks. Martha said you helped me yesterday. No thanks needed. His voice was low, roughened by disuse or silence. You all right now? Yes. Thank you. I'm sorry to have troubled you. He studied her for a moment, that gray gaze measuring. Then he nodded once and returned his attention to his coffee, effectively dismissing her. Clara stood there, wrong-footed by his indifference. She'd expected questions or offers of help, or even the kind of masculine posturing that came with rescue. Instead, he simply didn't care. It should have been relief. Instead, it felt strangely like another rejection. Martha appeared with more coffee. Jonah, you planning to sit there all day, or you got work waiting? Got work. He drained his cup and stood, pulling coins from his pocket and leaving them on the table, more than the coffee cost. Then he looked at Clara again, that same measuring look. You got plans? Clara faltered. I'm working on that. Martha says you got no money and no prospects. Heat flooded Clara's face. Martha talks too much. Usually. He didn't smile. But she's not wrong, is she? Clara lifted her chin. My circumstances are not your concern, Mr. Hale. True enough. He picked up his hat from the table. I got a ranch. Could use help with the house and cooking. You know how to cook? Yes. Some. Some's more than I got. He settled the hat on his head. Room and board in exchange for work. No promises beyond that. No expectations. You want out? You leave. Simple. Clara stared at him, certain she'd misunderstood. You're offering me employment? Offering you a roof and food in exchange for making that roof and food more civilized than what I manage on my own. He glanced at Martha. That seem unreasonable? Seems downright charitable, Martha said dryly. Also seems like you're setting yourself up for town gossip. Town already gossips. Jonah looked back at Clara. Your choice. Take it or leave it. Either way, I got fence that won't mend itself. He headed for the door, moving with the kind of economy that suggested a man who didn't waste motion or words. Wait. Clara followed him outside. The morning sun was already warm, promising brutal heat by afternoon. Mr. Hale, I don't understand. You don't know anything about me. Know you fainted from hunger and exhaustion. Know you got rejected in front of half the town and didn't cry or make a scene. Know you got nowhere else to go. He untied a horse from the hitching post, a sturdy bay mare with patient eyes. That's enough. But the propriety, people will talk. People talk regardless. He swung into the saddle with easy grace. I'm offering work, not marriage. You do your job, I'll do mine. Simple as that. Nothing about this is simple. No, he agreed, but it's better than starving in town waiting for the next stage east. He gathered the reins. I'll be back tomorrow morning. You want the job? Be ready to leave. You don't, I'll wish you luck, and move on. He rode away before Clara could respond, leaving her standing in the dusty street with her mouth open and her thoughts in complete chaos. Martha joined her on the sidewalk. Well, that was unexpected. Is he... Clara struggled for words. Is he safe? Legitimate? Safe as they come. Jonah Hale's about the most honest man I know. Martha crossed her arms. Took over his father's ranch when the old man died, maybe 10 years back. Runs it alone mostly. Gets his supplies in town, pays his bills, minds his business. Doesn't bother anyone, doesn't expect to be bothered. Then why offer this? He doesn't know me. Maybe that's exactly why. Martha turned to head back inside. You coming? Got customers waiting, and you still look like you could use another meal. Clara followed, but her mind stayed on Jonah Hale's offer. Room and board for work. No promises, no expectations. Simple. Except nothing about her situation was simple, and accepting help from a strange man felt dangerous in ways she couldn't quite articulate. But what were her alternatives? She spent the rest of the day in Martha's cafe, helping wash dishes in exchange for meals, listening to the town's rhythm. The women who came in for coffee spoke in low voices about the rejected bride and Jonah Hale's strange offer. Some thought it scandalous. Others thought it practical. None of them offered Clara an alternative. By evening, she'd made her decision. She had no money, no prospects, and no way back east. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. If Jonah Hale was willing to offer honest work in exchange for survival, she'd be a fool to refuse. Martha lent Clara a room above the cafe for the night. No charge, just female solidarity. In the morning, Clara dressed in her plainest dress, packed her few belongings, and waited in front of the cafe with her trunk at her feet. Jonah arrived exactly at dawn, driving a wagon this time instead of riding. He secured her trunk in the back without comment, then offered his hand to help her up to the seat. His palm was calloused and steady. Clara's hand looked impossibly small and soft against it. She settled on the hard wooden bench, arranging her skirts, acutely aware of his presence beside her. He smelled like leather and soap and something else. Wood smoke, maybe. Clean sweat. The scent of hard work honestly done. He clicked to the horses, and they moved forward, leaving the town behind. Clara didn't look back. The land spread out before them, vast and unforgiving under the morning sun. Empty prairie dotted with sage, rolling hills in the distance, sky so big it seemed to swallow everything beneath it. No buildings except the ones they were leaving. No people. No civilization's comfortable boundaries. Just space. Endless, terrifying space. Clara's hands twisted in her lap. She'd made another choice based on hope and desperation. What if this was another catastrophic mistake? What if Jonah Hale wasn't the honest man Martha described? What if she'd just traded one disaster for another? You afraid? His voice startled her. Clara looked at him, but he kept his eyes on the road ahead. Should I be? She countered. No, but that doesn't mean you aren't. Clara considered lying, then abandoned it. I'm terrified. He nodded once, acknowledging this. Fair enough. You just left everything familiar to work for a stranger in the middle of nowhere. Be strange if you weren't scared. Does that happen often? Women showing up to work for you? Never. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. You're the first person I've had in my house since my father died. That's... Clara tried to process this. 10 years? About that. Mr. Hale, I don't understand why you'd break 10 years of solitude for me. He was quiet for long enough that Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, yesterday, watching you in that town square, everyone staring, everyone judging, you sat there with your back straight and your head up, and you didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing you break. He glanced at her briefly. Took strength, that. Figured strength like that deserved better than starving in a boarding house. I'm not strong, Clara said quietly. I fainted. Because you were hungry and exhausted, not because you were weak. He turned his attention back to the road. There's a difference. They rode in silence after that. Clara watched the landscape change as they climbed into rougher country. More rocks, more hills, fewer signs of human presence. The ranch, when it finally appeared, was smaller than Clara expected. A house, a barn, several outbuildings clustered in a valley between low hills. Everything looked sturdy but worn, maintained for function rather than beauty. Jonah pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake. Not much, he said. But it's solid. Clara climbed down before he could help, needing to do this herself. The house was simple. Whitewashed wood, wide porch, real glass windows. Through the open door she glimpsed masculine chaos. Clothes draped over chairs, dishes stacked on a table, the general disorder of someone living alone without concern for appearances. "I'll get your trunk," Jonah said. "You can have the bedroom. I'll take the loft." "Mr. Hale, I can't take your kish. It's not a discussion." He lifted her trunk like it weighed nothing. "You're doing me a favor by bringing some order to this place. Least I can do is give you privacy and a real bed." He carried the trunk inside, and Clara followed slowly, crossing the threshold into her new temporary home. The interior was exactly what she'd glimpsed. One main room serving as kitchen and living area, a small bedroom off to one side, a ladder leading to a loft above. Everything was clean enough but deeply impersonal, as though no one actually lived here so much as existed between working hours. Jonah set her trunk in the bedroom, a small space with a bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the valley. Simple, functional. More than she had any right to expect. "Kitchen's got basics," he said, already moving back to the main room. "You need supplies, make a list. I'll get them next town trip." He paused at the door. "I work dawn to dark most days. Don't expect to see much of me. You keep the house, cook meals. That's all I'm asking." "What about—" Clara hesitated. "What about expectations beyond that?" He met her eyes, understanding exactly what she was asking. "You do your work, I do mine. That's the whole of it." His voice was firm. "I'm not Thomas Brennan. I don't have expectations about who you should be or how you should act. You're here to work, not to be someone's idea of proper. And if the town talks, let them." He settled his hat more firmly. "I've got fence needs mending. You settle in, make yourself at home." He headed outside, then called back, "Dinner around sunset if you're willing." Then he was gone, striding toward the barn with that same economical grace, leaving Clara alone in a strange house in the middle of nowhere with nothing but her trunk, her terror, and something that might have been hope. She stood in the center of the main room, breathing carefully, letting the silence settle around her. This was her choice, her decision. For better or worse, she was here. Clara set her jaw and started assessing the kitchen. If she was going to do this, she'd do it properly. Not because she was trying to please anyone, but because after a lifetime of being told she was too much, doing work that mattered felt like the smallest, most radical form of rebellion available. And she was done apologizing for taking up space. The kitchen revealed itself slowly as Clara explored. A cast iron stove that needed blacking, shelves stocked with basics but no organization, a water pump that worked but protested with every stroke. She found flour and cornmeal, dried beans and coffee, salt pork hanging in the cool cellar. Enough to work with if she was creative. She started with what she knew. Water heated on the stove. Surfaces scrubbed clean. The chaos of masculine disorder sorted into something resembling sense. Work had always been her refuge when thoughts grew too loud, and her thoughts were nearly deafening now. What had she done? Followed a stranger to an isolated ranch with no way to leave if things went wrong. Every cautionary tale she'd ever heard warned against exactly this kind of recklessness. Yet here she was, organizing shelves as if domesticity could somehow protect her from her own poor judgment. Through the window, she could see Jonah working in the distance. He moved between fence posts with steady rhythm, his movements efficient and purposeful. Even from here, she could sense his complete absorption in the task. He wasn't watching the house, wasn't checking on her, simply working, as promised. The hours passed. Clara found herself falling into the familiar comfort of household tasks, sweeping floors that hadn't seen proper attention in years, beating dust from blankets, discovering a cache of wild herbs someone had dried and forgotten. Probably Jonah's mother, she guessed, from how old they looked. She sorted through them carefully, salvaging what remained usable. By afternoon, she had beans soaking and cornbread batter mixed. Simple food, but honest. The kind of meal that spoke of care rather than sophistication. The front door opened without preamble. Clara looked up from the stove to find Jonah standing in the doorway, hat in hand, staring at the transformed room. "It's clean," he said finally, as if this required comment. That was the arrangement. Clara turned back to the stove, unexpectedly nervous. "Dinner will be ready at sunset, as requested." He crossed to the water pump, worked it until water flowed, and washed his hands with the thoroughness of a man accustomed to honest dirt. "Smells good. It's simple. I didn't know your preferences." Preferences. He dried his hands on a towel that Clara had washed and mended that afternoon. "Haven't thought about food preferences in years. Mostly I eat whatever keeps me working." He looked around the room again. "You didn't have to do all this today." "I needed to understand the space, how things work." Clara checked the cornbread. "And I needed to stay busy." "Fair enough." He headed toward the door again. "I'll wash up proper before dinner. There's a pump out back, trough's clean." He left, and Clara released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. The interaction had been brief, impersonal, exactly what he'd promised. So why did she feel so unsettled? Because kindness without expectation felt foreign. Because she kept waiting for demands that didn't come. Because every man she'd known had wanted something from her. Compliance, ornamental beauty, proof of their own good taste. Jonah Hale seemed to want nothing except clean floors and cooked food. It should have been relief. Instead, it was profoundly disorienting. Sunset painted the valley in shades of amber and rose. Clara set the table, 2 places, simple settings, and ladled beans into bowls. The cornbread emerged golden from the oven, and she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Not fancy food, but good food, nourishing and honest. Jonah returned as the last light faded, his hair damp from washing, his work shirt exchanged for a clean one. He paused at the threshold, and Clara realized he was waiting for permission to enter his own house. "Please," she said quietly. "Sit." He took the chair across from her, studying the meal with something like wonder. Been a long time since food looked like this. Like what? Like someone cared whether it was good or not. He served himself, took a bite, and something in his expression shifted. Not quite pleasure, but close. Recognition, maybe. "Your mother teach you to cook?" "A cook taught me, after my mother died. My aunt thought I should have practical skills in case—" Clara trailed off. "In case your circumstances changed." Jonah finished the thought without judgment. Smart. They ate in silence for several minutes. It should have been awkward, but somehow wasn't. The quiet felt companionable rather than tense, as if words would have been intrusive. "You never asked," Clara said eventually, "why I answered Thomas Brennan's advertisement." "Not my business. Most people would be curious." "Most people talk too much." He soaked cornbread in his beans. "Figure you'll tell me if it matters. Otherwise, it's your story to keep." Clara studied him across the table. "That's an unusual philosophy." "Maybe. Or maybe I just know what it's like to want privacy." He met her eyes briefly. "People in town think I'm strange because I keep to myself. Don't bother with socials or church gatherings. Don't explain my choices." He returned to his food. "Seems to me everyone's entitled to their own reasons. Even when those reasons lead to mistakes? Especially then." He pushed his empty bowl aside. "Making mistakes just means you're trying. Only people who never fail are the ones too scared to attempt anything." That's, Clara searched for words, surprisingly philosophical for a rancher. His mouth twitched. "Read a lot. Not much else to do when you live alone." He stood, collecting his dishes. "Leave these. I'll wash up." "That's not—" "You cooked. I clean. Seems fair." He was already at the pump, filling a basin. "You want to argue about fairness? We can. But I'm going to wash dishes while we do it, so you might as well save your breath." Clara found herself smiling despite everything. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone more—" She gestured vaguely. "More something. More talkers than doers in this world already." Jonah scrubbed a bowl with methodical attention. "Never saw the point in being one more. Clara stood, uncertain what to do with herself. The room was clean, dinner finished, evening stretching ahead with no script to follow. I should retire. It's been a long day. You should do what you want. He didn't look up from the dishes. House is yours, same as mine now. You want to sit on the porch and watch stars, do that. Want to sleep? Sleep. Want to read? There's books in the loft. He paused. Just don't feel like you have to disappear because I'm here. That's not how this works. How does this work? However we make it work. He dried his hands. I'm going to check on the horses, then probably read until I can't keep my eyes open. You do whatever brings you peace. He headed for the door, then stopped. Clara. It was the first time he'd used her given name. She looked up. You did good today. Just wanted you to know that. He left before she could respond. Clara stood in the clean kitchen of a stranger's house and felt something unexpected unfurl in her chest. Not hope, exactly. Something quieter. Something that felt almost like safety. She found herself drawn to the porch as darkness settled. The stars emerged one by one, more numerous than she'd ever seen back east, where city lights dimmed the sky. Out here, they blazed, countless points of light in an ocean of darkness. She heard Jonah moving around the barn, the low murmur of his voice speaking to the horses. Not words she could distinguish, just tone, gentle, patient. The same way he spoke to everything, she realized. No wasted words, but no harshness either. When he returned, he found her still on the porch. He settled into the other chair without comment, tilting his head back to study the sky. Never gets old, he said quietly. This view. It's beautiful. Different from Philadelphia? Clara glanced at him, surprised. How did you know? Martha mentioned it, said you'd come from back east. He kept his gaze on the stars. Not prying, just making conversation. Yes, very different from Philadelphia. Clara pulled her shawl tighter against the cooling air. There, you could barely see stars through the smoke and light. Here, it's like they're close enough to touch. First time I saw a city, I couldn't sleep. Too much noise, too much light, felt suffocating. Jonah shifted in his chair. Came back here and spent a week just sitting out here, remembering how to breathe. When was that? After my father died. Had to go to Denver to settle his affairs. Lawyer insisted it couldn't be done by post. His voice held old frustration. Whole trip felt like being trapped. Too many people, too many words, too many expectations about how a man should grieve. Clara recognized that tone, the weariness of performing grief for others' comfort. What did you want? To be left alone to feel what I felt. He stood, stretching. Should sleep. Dawn comes early. He paused at the door. You need anything? I'm in the loft. Otherwise, see you at breakfast. Jonah. Clara rose as well. Thank you for today, for all of this. You earned your keep, no thanks needed, but his expression softened slightly. Sleep well, Clara. The next days fell into rhythm. Clara woke with the sun, found coffee already made and Jonah already working. She cooked breakfast, left his portion warming on the stove, and by the time she'd cleaned up, he'd eaten and returned to whatever task consumed him. Fences, barn repairs. Herding cattle she rarely saw but heard lowing in distant pastures. She spent her days bringing order to years of neglect. The house revealed itself slowly, good bones under layers of dust and disregard. She found curtains packed away and hung them to soften the stark windows, discovered a rocking chair with a broken runner, and spent an afternoon figuring out how to mend it. Organized the chaos of tools and supplies into something approaching sense. Evenings, they shared meals and quiet conversation. Jonah never pried, never asked questions that felt invasive. Instead, he spoke about the land, which plants indicated good water, how to read weather in the clouds, why certain pastures grew better grass. He offered information like gifts, expecting nothing in return. Clara found herself talking more than she had in years. Small things at first, memories of her mother's garden, books she'd read, observations about the landscape. Jonah listened with the same complete attention he gave everything, and slowly, she began sharing deeper truths. I thought marriage would solve everything, she admitted one evening, watching the sunset paint the hills purple. Thomas's letters made frontier life sound romantic, challenging but meaningful. I imagined teaching his daughters, building something that mattered. What happened instead? I stepped off the stage looking wrong, being wrong, too educated, too refined, too much everything he didn't want. Clara traced patterns on her coffee cup. The irony is, I'd spent my whole life being told I wasn't enough. Not pretty enough, not charming enough, not compliant enough. Then I travel 1,000 miles to be told I'm too much. Problem wasn't you being too much, Jonah said quietly. Problem was him being too small to see what he had. Clara looked at him sharply. You don't know that. You don't know me. Know you've worked yourself nearly sick this week. Know you mended that chair when you could have just asked me to do it. Know you learned to make coffee the way I like it without asking what that was. He met her eyes. Know you're capable and honest and exactly what you claim to be. If that's too much for some men, that's their failing, not yours. Something in Clara's chest tightened. Why do you care? Why shouldn't I? Because I'm nothing to you, a stranger you took in out of what? Pity? Charity? Took you in because leaving you in that town felt wrong. Jonah's voice stayed level. Keeping you here because you're good company and make excellent cornbread. Simple as that. Nothing about this is simple. No, he agreed, but it doesn't have to be complicated either. He stood, collecting their dishes. You want complicated, the world's full of it. Here, on this ranch, things can be as simple or complex as we make them. Clara watched him wash dishes with the same methodical care he applied to everything. What do you want from me, Jonah? He paused, considering. Same thing I want from everyone. Honesty, effort, kindness when you can manage it. He resumed scrubbing. Beyond that, you don't owe me anything. That can't be all. Why not? Because everyone wants something. Everyone has expectations. Then I guess I'm not everyone. He dried his hands. You keep waiting for the other boot to drop, Clara. Keep expecting me to reveal some hidden agenda or make demands you can't meet. But there's nothing hidden here. This is it. Work, food, shelter, conversation when we both want it. That's the whole of the arrangement. And if I want more than that? The question escaped before Clara could stop it. Jonah turned to look at her fully, his gray eyes searching. What kind of more? Clara's courage failed. Never mind. Forget I said anything. Can't forget it now. He leaned against the counter. You asking about staying permanent? About something beyond work arrangements? I don't know what I'm asking. Clara stood abruptly. I should sleep. Early start tomorrow. Clara. His voice stopped her at the bedroom door. You're not a burden here. Want you to know that. Whether you stay a week or a year or forever, you're not imposing. You're contributing. There's a difference. She nodded without speaking and escaped to her room. That night, lying in the narrow bed, Clara faced truths she'd been avoiding. She liked it here. Liked the work, the quiet, the sense of purpose. Liked Jonah's steady presence and unexpected kindness. Liked becoming someone who mended chairs and baked bread and earned her place through capability rather than compliance. But liking something didn't make it permanent. Didn't guarantee safety. She'd liked the idea of Thomas Brennan too, and that had ended in disaster. The difference, she realized, was that Jonah had never promised anything beyond exactly what he delivered. No false promises, no romantic illusions, just honest work and mutual respect. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was more than she'd ever had. 2 weeks became 3. Clara's hands developed calluses from work. Her skin darkened from hanging laundry in the sun. Her dresses loosened as physical labor burned away the softness Thomas Brennan had judged so harshly. She was becoming someone new, someone harder, stronger, more capable. The refined Philadelphia lady was disappearing, replaced by someone who could manage a household in harsh country, who could make meals from basic supplies, who could look at endless prairie and feel possibility instead of terror. Jonah noticed. He said nothing directly, but Clara caught him watching sometimes with an expression she couldn't quite read. Approval, maybe. Or recognition. One morning, she found him examining the garden plot behind the house, a weedy square that hadn't been worked in years. My mother kept vegetables here, he said without preamble. After she died, I let it go. Didn't seem worth the effort for just me. Clara studied the space. It's got good sun, decent soil if we clear the weeds. You know gardening? My mother taught me. Before, she gestured vaguely at everything that came after. I've missed it. Take it if you want it. Jonah handed her a spade he'd been holding. Make it yours. Whatever you grow, we'll use. Clara accepted the tool, surprised by the weight of it. You're giving me a garden? Giving you space to do what you want with. He nodded toward the abandoned plot. Seems like you might need something that's yours. Something you choose. That afternoon, while Jonah worked distant fences, Clara attacked the weeds with surprising ferocity. The physical labor felt good. Productive anger channeled into clearing space for new growth. She worked until her back ached and her hands blistered, and when Jonah returned at sunset, he found half the plot cleared and Clara too exhausted to cook. Sit, he ordered, guiding her to a chair. I'll manage dinner. That's not the arrangement. Arrangement includes common sense. You worked yourself raw today. He examined her blistered palms. Should have worn gloves. I forgot. I noticed. He disappeared into the bedroom and returned with a tin of salve. Give me your hands. Clara obeyed, too tired to argue. His touch was gentle, clinical, as he smoothed ointment over the worst blisters. His own hands were scarred and calloused, evidence of years of similar work. Garden means a lot to you, he observed. It's something I can control, something I can make grow. Clara watched him tend her hands. Everything else in my life has been decided by other people. Who I should be, where I should go, what I should want. A garden is just mine. Then it's worth the blisters. He finished with the salve and released her hands. But wear gloves tomorrow. We've got plenty in the barn. He made simple food, fried salt pork, beans, bread from yesterday's baking. They ate in comfortable silence, and Clara found herself studying him across the table. Strong features weathered by sun and work, hands that could gentle horses and mend her blisters with equal care, eyes that saw what she needed before she asked. Why do you live alone? The question emerged unbidden. Martha said you've had no one here since your father died. That seems lonely. Sometimes it is. Jonah didn't look offended by the directness. But loneliness is better than being surrounded by people who expect you to be someone you're not. Is that what happened? People had expectations? My father did. Expected me to marry, produce heirs, expand the ranch. He pushed food around his plate. I tried courting a few times, met women in town, went through the motions, but it always felt like performing, like I was supposed to follow a script I'd never agreed to. So you stopped. So I stopped. Figured being alone honestly was better than being partnered dishonestly. He met her eyes. Some people aren't meant for conventional arrangements. I've made peace with being one of them. Clara absorbed this. Does that bother you? Being unconventional? Used to. Worried what people thought, whether I was failing some obligation. He stood to clear dishes. Then my father died, and I realized the only person I'd been performing for was him. Once he was gone, I could finally just be. And what did you discover about who you are? That I'm happiest working with my hands. That I prefer silence to chatter. That I'd rather be alone than pretend to want things I don't. He paused at the pump. That contentment matters more than other people's approval. That's remarkably self-aware. Or remarkably selfish, depending on perspective. But his tone held no shame. I've been called worse. Clara helped him clean up despite her tired hands. They worked in synchronized quiet, and she realized they'd developed rhythms. She washed, he dried, she stored, he reset the kitchen for morning. Small domestic choreography that felt natural rather than forced. On the porch afterward, stars emerging in the darkening sky, Clara felt something shift inside her. Not love. That would be foolish, premature, impossible. But something quieter, trust maybe. The beginning of belonging. Jonah, she kept her voice steady. I'd like to stay. Not just until I earn stage fare east, longer, if you'll have me. He was quiet long enough that Clara's heart sank. Then, what changed? Nothing changed. Everything became clear. She looked at him. I like the work. I like the quiet. I like knowing what's expected and being capable of meeting it. I like She hesitated. I like not being judged for being myself. You're always yourself here. That's not something you should have to earn. Maybe, but it's something I've never had before. Clara gripped the porch railing. I know this isn't permanent. I know it's an employment arrangement, nothing more. But if you're willing, I'd like to stay, make the garden, learn the land, be useful. Jonah studied the horizon, his profile thoughtful in the fading light. You're already useful, already earning your keep and then some. He glanced at her. But if you want to stay longer, I'm not objecting. Place feels more like a home with you in it. Relief flooded through Clara. Thank you. Nothing to thank me for. We're making this arrangement work for both of us. He stood. Should sleep. Garden won't clear itself tomorrow. But at the door, he paused. Clara, you know you can leave whenever you want, right? This is an indentured servitude. If you wake up tomorrow and decide you want out, you go. No judgment, no debt. I know. Just making sure. His expression softened slightly. Sleep well. Clara remained on the porch after he'd gone inside, listening to the night sounds. Crickets singing, distant cattle lowing, wind through the sage. Sounds that were becoming familiar. Sounds that were becoming home. She'd come to this territory looking for rescue. Instead, she was finding something better. The chance to rescue herself. To build capability and confidence through honest work. To become someone who belonged not because she'd been chosen, but because she'd chosen. It wasn't the future she'd imagined in Philadelphia. It wasn't the romantic partnership Thomas Brennan's letters had promised. It was better, real, solid, hers. And for the first time since stepping off that stage into public humiliation, Clara Whitmore felt something that might have been peace. The garden became Clara's meditation. Each morning, after breakfast, she spent hours working the soil, clearing years of neglect, preparing earth that hadn't been touched with care since Jonah's mother died. The work was hard, and her hands protested despite the gloves Jonah had found for her, but something about coaxing life from stubborn ground felt deeply right. She was on her knees pulling weeds when the riders appeared. 3 men on horseback, coming up the valley road at a pace that suggested purpose rather than casual visiting. Clara stood slowly, shading her eyes against the morning sun. She didn't recognize them, but something about their approach made her uneasy. Jonah emerged from the barn, his posture changing the moment he saw them. Not quite tense, but alert, watchful. He crossed the yard to stand between Clara and the approaching riders, and she noticed he'd brought the rifle he kept for predators. The men reined in at the property line. The leader was perhaps 40, with a marshal's badge glinting on his vest and eyes that cataloged everything. The 2 behind him looked like hired men, hard faces, harder hands, the kind of men who got paid to enforce other people's will. Jonah Hale, the marshal's voice carried clear across the distance. Been a while. Marshal Crane. Jonah's tone gave nothing away. Something I can help you with? Looking for someone. Thought you might have information. Crane's gaze flicked to Clara, lingered. That your wife? My housekeeper. Jonah shifted slightly, blocking the marshal's view. What's this about? Got word you might be sheltering someone. Man named Jack Morrison. Goes by other names too, Jack Mason, John Morris, various combinations. Crane pulled a folded paper from his pocket. Wanted for theft. Horse theft specifically, over in Colorado. Don't know anyone by those names. Funny thing about Jack Morrison, Crane unfolded the paper slowly, deliberately. He's got a talent for convincing people to help him. Good talker, makes folks feel sorry for him, gets them invested in his troubles. He held up what looked like a wanted poster. Real convincing liar when he needs to be. I'm sure he is, but I haven't seen him. You certain about that? Man matching his description was spotted heading this direction 2 months back. Then he disappeared. Crane's eyes narrowed. Around the same time you stopped coming to town regular. Clara felt ice settle in her stomach. 2 months ago was before she'd arrived, but the implication was clear. The marshal thought Jonah was hiding someone. I stopped coming to town because I had work here, Jonah said evenly. Ranch doesn't run itself. That's so. Crane gestured to his men. Mind if we look around? Just to be thorough. Yes, I mind. Jonah's voice hardened. You want to search my property, get a warrant. Otherwise, you can turn around and leave. Now, Jonah, There's no need to be difficult about this. Crane's tone turned condescending. We're just trying to find a criminal. You help us out, we'll be on our way. Simple cooperation. And I'm simply exercising my rights. You want to search, bring proper legal authority. Jonah didn't move, but Clara felt the shift in his stance, ready for trouble if it came. Until then, you're trespassing. One of the hired men spat tobacco juice. Mighty protective for someone with nothing to hide. Mighty suspicious for lawmen supposedly doing legitimate work, Jonah countered. Real marshals don't travel with muscle. They travel with deputies. Crane's expression tightened. These are deputized. Then they'll understand about warrants and due process. Jonah raised the rifle slightly, not aiming, just making its presence clear. I'll say it once more. Leave my property. Come back with legal authority if you have cause. Otherwise, stay gone. The tension stretched taut. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd witnessed confrontation before, but never like this, never with the real possibility of violence humming in the air like heat lightning. Finally, Crane smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. All right, Hale. We'll do this proper. But you should know, harboring a fugitive carries consequences. Real, serious consequences. So does harassing citizens without cause. Jonah stood unmoved. You have yourself a good day, Marshal. Crane gathered his reins, but his attention shifted to Clara. Ma'am, you all right here? Man treats you proper? The question was pointed, implying impropriety or worse. Clara lifted her chin. Mr. Hale has been nothing but respectful and honorable. More than I can say for men who ride onto private property making accusations without evidence. Something flickered across Crane's face. Surprise, maybe. Or recalculation. Just asking, ma'am. Woman alone with a man this far from town, sometimes situations aren't what they seem. This situation is exactly what it seems. Employment. Honest work for honest pay. Clara moved to stand beside Jonah, a deliberate statement. Is there anything else, Marshal? Because I have a garden needs tending, and you're blocking my son. One of the hired men laughed, sharp and quickly cut off by Crane's glare. The marshal tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy. We'll be back, Hale. With proper authority. I'll be here. They rode away slowly, taking their time, making a show of studying the property as they went. Clara watched until they disappeared over the ridge, then released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Who's Jack Morrison? She asked quietly. Jonah was silent for a long moment. Then, man I helped, 6 months back. He showed up half dead, claimed he'd been robbed and beaten, left for dead by road agents. He lowered the rifle. I gave him food, let him rest a few days, then he moved on. Was he lying? I don't know. Jonah turned toward the house. Maybe, probably, but I wasn't going to let a man die to find out. Clara followed him inside. He set the rifle by the door and stood at the window, watching the empty road. His jaw was tight, shoulders rigid with tension he hadn't shown the marshal. They'll come back, Clara said. I know. With a warrant? Maybe. Or maybe they'll try something else. He rubbed his face. Crane's not really a marshal, or he is, but he works for the railroad most of the time, does their dirty work. What does the railroad want with a horse thief? That's the question, isn't it? Jonah moved away from the window. Jack Morrison might be a horse thief, or he might be someone who crossed the railroad. Hard to know truth from lies when powerful men are involved. Clara processed this. So you might have actually harbored a criminal, or I might have saved an innocent man from railroad justice. He looked at her directly. Does it matter? Would you have wanted me to turn him away? I don't know. I wasn't here. Clara sank into a chair. But I'm here now. If they come back, if there's trouble, you leave. First sign of real danger, you take the mare and ride to town. Find Martha. She'll help you. I'm not leaving you to face this alone. Clara. His voice was firm. This isn't your fight. You didn't sign on for railroad troubles or fugitive harboring accusations. I signed on to work here, to help however I'm useful. She stood. Running at the first sign of trouble isn't useful. It's also not brave to stay and get hurt for someone else's choices. Maybe not, but it's loyal. Clara held his gaze. You gave me shelter when I had nothing. treated me with respect when everyone else saw me as a problem to be solved. I'm not abandoning you because things got difficult. Well, something shifted in Jonah's expression. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you helped a dying man without asking questions. I know you stood up to armed men rather than let them violate your rights. I know you're honest and decent and exactly the kind of person who ends up paying for other people's sins. She moved closer. So no, I'm not leaving. Tell me what to do if they come back and I'll do it, but don't ask me to run. Jonah studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. All right, but if things go bad, you do exactly what I say. No arguing, no hesitation. Agreed? Agreed. They spent the rest of the day in tense normalcy. Jonah worked close to the house instead of riding out to distant pastures. Claire divided her attention between the garden and watching the road, hyper-aware of every dust cloud, every distant sound. Evening came without incident. They ate dinner mostly in silence, both too wound up for easy conversation. Tell me about Jack Morrison, Claire said finally. The real story. Jonah set down his fork. Not much to tell. He showed up in bad shape, claimed he'd been jumped on the road, had bruises and cuts that backed up his story. I let him stay in the barn, gave him food and medicine. He rested 3 days, then said he needed to move on before whoever hurt him came looking. Did you believe him? At the time, yes. He seemed genuinely scared, grateful for help, but anxious to leave. Jonah pushed his plate aside. Looking back, knowing what I know now, maybe some of it was performance, but maybe it was real. I still can't tell. What did he talk about, those 3 days? Not much. He was in pain, slept mostly. When he was awake, he talked about Denver, said he'd worked for a freight company there, got on the wrong side of someone powerful. Jonah's brow furrowed, remembering. He mentioned the railroad once, said they owned everything in Colorado, bought judges and marshals like other men bought cattle. So if he stole horses from the railroad, he'd have made enemies with long reach. Jonah stood, moving to the window again, watching, always watching now. Problem is, I don't know if he actually stole anything or if the railroad just wants him silenced for knowing too much. Clara cleared the table, thinking, what happens if they come back with a warrant? They search, find nothing because there's nothing to find. Then they leave or they don't. His tone was flat. Depends on whether they're actually looking for Morrison or just looking for an excuse. An excuse for what? To cause trouble. Send a message. The railroad's been buying up land in this valley for years. Most of the small ranchers have sold. I haven't. He turned from the window. Could be they see me as an obstacle. Could be this Morrison business is just convenient timing. You think they'd manufacture charges? I think powerful men do whatever serves their interests. Jonah's voice held old bitterness. My father fought railroad expansion for years, died owing legal fees from defending property rights. I've kept fighting because I'll be damned if I let his struggle be for nothing. Clara absorbed this. The situation was more complex than she'd realized, not just about one fugitive, but about land and power and the railroad's inexorable expansion west. They'll try to intimidate you, she said quietly, force you to sell. They can try. Jonah, Clara moved to stand beside him. I meant what I said. I'm not running, but I need to know, is this a fight you can win? Honestly, I don't know. He met her eyes. The railroad has money, influence, bought law on their side. I have stubbornness and legal ownership. It's not even odds. But you'll fight anyway. I'll fight anyway. His jaw set. Because if men like me don't stand up, who will? How many ranches do they get to steal through intimidation before someone says enough? Clara understood that impulse. She'd spent her life bending to others' expectations, and where had it gotten her? Rejected in a town square, labeled too much and not enough simultaneously. At some point, compliance stopped being virtue and became cowardice. Then we fight, she said simply. Clara, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I'm choosing to. She held his gaze. You gave me choice when no one else would. Let me choose this. The next 3 days passed in waiting. Jonah taught Clara to shoot, taking her out to a clearing where she practiced with the rifle until her shoulder ached from recoil. She wasn't a natural marksman, but she learned to hit what she aimed at more often than not. The goal isn't to kill anyone, Jonah explained. It's to make enough noise and trouble that they decide easy targets exist elsewhere. Clara loaded and reloaded, fired until the motions became automatic. She'd never imagined needing such skills, but then again, she'd never imagined many things about her current life. On the fourth day, riders appeared again. This time, there were 5 of them. Crane and his 2 men, plus a thin man in a suit carrying official-looking papers, and another rider Clara didn't recognize. Older, weathered, with the look of someone who'd spent decades enforcing other people's will. Jonah met them at the property line again, Clara standing beside him. She'd tucked a small pistol into her apron pocket. Jonah's mother's, he'd said, giving it to her that morning, just in case. "We've got our warrant, Hale." Crane held up the papers with obvious satisfaction. "Judge signed it this morning. We're authorized to search your property for Jack Morrison and any evidence of his crimes." Jonah took the papers, read them carefully. His expression gave nothing away, but Clara saw his jaw tighten. "This warrant is for Morrison specifically," he said finally. "Not for general harassment or property damage. You search the buildings, and when you find nothing, you leave. Clear?" "Crystal." Crane dismounted, gesturing to his men. "Let's get this done." They searched methodically, barn, outbuildings, even the root cellar. Clara and Jonah stood in the yard watching, Jonah's hand resting casually near the rifle he'd propped against the porch railing. The thin man in the suit wandered over, examining the house with obvious interest. "Nice property, good water, decent grazing. Railroad's been acquiring land in this valley. You ever think about selling, Mr. Hale?" "No? Might be worth considering. We offer fair prices. Better than struggling alone out here." The man's smile was practiced, professional. "Especially with all this legal trouble. Could make your life easier." "My life's plenty easy, thanks." "Is it?" The man glanced at Clara. "Supporting a household now, I see. More mouths to feed, more responsibility. The railroad's offer would set you up comfortable somewhere else. Somewhere with less scrutiny." Clara felt anger flash hot. "Mr. Hale's not interested in being run off his own land by intimidation dressed up as legal process." The man's smile didn't waver. "Just making conversation, ma'am. No offense intended." "None taken." Clara's voice was ice. "And none of your transparent manipulation is working either, so perhaps save your breath." Something like respect flickered across the man's face before the professional mask returned. He tipped his hat and wandered away. The search took over an hour. They went through everything, opened crates, moved hay bales, checked the loft. Found nothing because there was nothing to find. Crane emerged from the barn looking frustrated. "Well, Hale, you're clean. This time. Every time, because I'm not harboring anyone." "We'll see." Crane mounted his horse. "Railroad's patient. We'll be keeping an eye on this property. Any suspicious activity, we'll be back." "You do that." Jonah picked up his rifle. "And I'll keep defending my legal rights. Should be entertaining for both of us." They rode away, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. Clara waited until they disappeared before letting her rigid posture relax. "That went better than expected," she said quietly. "That was just the opening move." Jonah's voice was grim. "They established they can come here with warrants. Next time, they'll have different charges, different excuses. Keep pushing until I break or sell. Then we make sure you don't break." He looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Why are you doing this?" "Really?" Clara considered her answer carefully. "Because for the first time in my life, I'm somewhere I chose to be, doing work that matters, living with dignity instead of performing someone else's idea of proper." She met his eyes. "Thomas Brennan rejected me for being too refined. The railroad's trying to intimidate you for being too stubborn. We're both being punished for not fitting convenient molds. Seems like we should stand together." "Standing together might get you hurt." "Running away guarantees I'll regret it." Clara touched his arm briefly. "I'm staying, Jonah. Accept it." He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but we need to be smart about this. Prepared." They spent the evening planning. Jonah explained the legal framework. His father had fought similar battles, left detailed records of property rights and precedents. The railroad couldn't legally force him to sell, but they could make keeping the land expensive and exhausting. The goal is to make me give up, Jonah said, spreading maps across the table. Through legal fees, harassment, cutting off my access to markets, make ranching impossible without actually stealing the land outright. Can they do that? Cut off access? They control the railroad. They can refuse to ship my cattle or charge rates that make it unprofitable. Force me to drive herds to distant markets at my own expense and risk. His finger traced routes on the map. Takes money to fight that. Money I don't have unlimited access to. Clara studied the maps, thinking. What about other ranchers, the ones who haven't sold? Could you organize together? Most have already sold. The few left are barely hanging on. Jonah's expression was bleak. The railroad's been patient, picked us off one by one. By the time I realized what was happening, I was nearly the last one standing. Then we find a way to make standing profitable enough to sustain. Claire's mind worked through possibilities. Your cattle are good quality? Best in the valley. My father bred for hardiness and beef quality both. Then we find buyers who'll pay premium prices. Buyers the railroad doesn't control. Clara pulled the map closer. Denver's not the only market. What about mining camps, military forts, places that need quality beef and don't care about railroad politics? Jonah stared at her. That would mean driving cattle through rough country. Week-long drives at minimum. It's dangerous, expensive, risky. So is giving up. Clara met his eyes. You said your father fought for years, died fighting. Are you going to let that fight end because the easy routes are blocked? Something shifted in Jonah's expression, surprise giving way to consideration, then to something that might have been hope. You're right. I've been thinking like my father, fighting the same legal battles. But times have changed. The fight needs to change too. Exactly. Clara felt excitement building. The railroad expects you to either sell or slowly starve. They're not expecting you to circumvent them entirely. They talked late into the night, strategizing routes and markets, calculating costs and risks. It was dangerous and uncertain, but it was action. Forward motion instead of defensive waiting. Clara fell asleep that night, feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Useful. Not ornamentally useful, but genuinely valuable. Her education, her ability to think strategically, her refusal to accept defeat, all the things Thomas Brennan had deemed too much, were exactly what Jonah needed. She woke to shouting. Clara scrambled out of bed, heart pounding, and rushed to the window. Dawn was barely breaking, but she could see figures in the yard. Jonah stood on the porch, rifle in hand, facing down 3 men on horseback. Not Crane this time. These men wore no badges, carried no warrants, just hard faces and harder intentions. Claire grabbed the pistol from her nightstand and ran outside in her nightgown and bare feet, propriety forgotten in the face of immediate danger. Telling you one last time, one of the men was saying. Railroads made a generous offer. Time to accept it. And I'm telling you one last time to get off my property. Jonah's voice was deadly calm. Before this conversation turns unpleasant. The man laughed. 3 of us. 1 of you. You sure you want to make this unpleasant? 2 of us, Clara said clearly, stepping onto the porch with the pistol visible in her hand. And we're on our own property defending our legal rights. You're trespassing with clear criminal intent. The men turned to stare at her. Clara was acutely aware of her state of undress, her loose hair, her bare feet. Everything improper and scandalous. But she kept the pistol steady and her voice firm. The lady's got spirit, one man said with a leer. Too bad you won't be around to enjoy it, Hale. Railroad's done being patient. Then the railroad can take me to court, Jonah said flatly. But you 3 are leaving, now, or I start shooting, and Wyoming law is real clear about defending property against armed trespassers. You wouldn't. Try me. The standoff stretched taut. Clara's heart hammered so hard she thought everyone must hear it, but she kept her hand steady on the pistol. Finally, the leader spat into the dirt. This isn't over, Hale. No, Jonah agreed, but this conversation is. Ride out or get carried out. Your choice. They left, but slowly, making threats and promises about what came next. Clara stood beside Jonah until they disappeared. Then her knees went weak. Jonah caught her elbow, steadying her. You shouldn't have come out here. You're welcome, Clara said shakily. I'm serious. That was dangerous. So is letting you face 3 armed men alone. She looked at him. We're in this together, remember? That means showing up when it matters. Jonah's expression softened. You were terrified. Absolutely petrified. Still am. Clara managed a weak smile. But I showed up anyway. That counts for something, doesn't it? It counts for everything. He guided her back inside, his hand gentle on her arm. But Clara, we need to talk about what this means. It's escalating. They came at dawn, no pretense of legality. Next time might be worse. The next time we'll handle it. Clara set the pistol on the table with shaking hands. I'm not leaving, Jonah. Stop asking. He poured coffee with steady hands that belied the tension in his shoulders. I'm not asking you to leave permanently, but maybe temporarily. Until this settles. It won't settle. Not unless you sell or they find another way to win. Clara accepted the coffee, grateful for something to hold. Running won't solve anything. Neither will getting hurt. Neither will living in fear. She met his eyes over the coffee cup. I spent my whole life being afraid. Afraid of disappointing people, afraid of being too much, afraid of making wrong choices. I'm done being afraid. If standing with you means facing danger, I'll face it. You're insane. Probably. Clara took a sip of too hot coffee. But I'm also right. We stand together or we fall separately. Those are the only options. Jonah stared at her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. A real smile, reaching his eyes. You know what Thomas Brennan was? What? A fool. An absolute fool for not seeing what he had. Jonah's voice was quiet but certain. You're not too refined, Clara. You're exactly refined enough, exactly strong enough, exactly brave enough. You're... He trailed off, seeming to search for words. I'm what? Clara's heart hammered for entirely different reasons now. You're extraordinary, and I'm grateful you're here. He set down his coffee. Even though it terrifies me that you might get hurt because of my choices. Clara felt something warm and dangerous unfurl in her chest. Not love, still too soon for that word, but the beginning of it, the possibility. Then we'll make sure neither of us gets hurt, she said softly, by being smarter, faster, and more stubborn than the railroad expects. Deal? Deal. Jonah offered his hand and Clara shook it. His palm was warm and calloused against hers, steady despite everything. They stood there in the morning light, hands clasped, facing uncertain danger together. And Clara realized that this moment of choosing to stand beside someone instead of being chosen or rejected, this was the freedom she'd been searching for all along. Not rescue, not romance, not someone else's definition of proper, just the radical act of choosing her own ground and refusing to be moved from it. They didn't wait for the railroad to make the next move. That same morning, after the dawn confrontation, Jonah hitched the wagon and they rode to town together. Clara had dressed carefully, her most respectable dress, hair pinned with deliberate precision. If she was going to walk back into the place that had witnessed her humiliation, she'd do it on her own terms. The town hadn't changed, but Clara had. She sat straighter on the wagon seat, met curious stares with level calm instead of shame. Let them look. Let them whisper. She knew her own worth now, and their opinions couldn't diminish it. Martha saw them coming and met them at the cafe door. Well now, this is unexpected. Her eyes swept over Clara, taking in the changes a month of hard work had wrought. You look different. I am different. Clara climbed down from the wagon without waiting for Jonah's help. Is your offer of coffee still good? Always. Martha's gaze shifted to Jonah. You too, or you got business elsewhere? Got business at the land office, then the telegraph. Jonah touched Clara's shoulder briefly. I'll be back in an hour. He left, and Martha ushered Clara inside. The cafe was mostly empty, the morning rush finished. Martha poured coffee and sat across from Clara, studying her with sharp eyes. You going to tell me what's really happening out there, or are we going to dance around it? Clara wrapped her hands around the warm cup. The railroad wants Jonah's land. They've been sending men to intimidate him. Yesterday they came with a warrant searching for a fugitive. This morning they came without one, just threats. Martha's expression darkened. They're playing dirty then. Very. But Jonah won't sell, and I won't leave. Clara met Martha's eyes. I need your help. With what? Information. The other ranchers who sold to the railroad, why did they sell? Was it just money, or did the railroad use other leverage? Martha was quiet for a moment, considering. Then she stood and locked the cafe door, flipping the sign to closed. This conversation needs privacy. She returned with a bottle and 2 glasses. Whiskey, because you're going to need it. Over the next hour, Martha laid out the railroad's campaign in brutal detail. It had started 5 years ago with fair offers and friendly persuasion. When that didn't work fast enough, accidents began happening. Fences cut, cattle rustled, barns mysteriously catching fire. Nothing provable, but the pattern was clear. Sam Richardson refused to sell for 3 years, Martha said, pouring another finger of whiskey. Then his barn burned with 20 head of cattle inside. Week later, his water well was poisoned. Month after that, his wife left him, couldn't take the stress anymore. He sold for half what the railroad originally offered. That's extortion. That's business, according to the railroad. Martha's voice was bitter. They've got judges in their pocket, marshals on payroll. Anyone who fights back finds themselves tangled in legal troubles they can't afford to fight. Clara absorbed this. What about organizing the remaining ranchers? Collective resistance? Tried that. Railroad picked off the leaders one by one. Legal harassment mostly, but also social pressure. Got the banker to call in loans early. Got the general store to refuse credit. Made it impossible to operate. Martha leaned back. Last meeting we had, only 4 ranchers showed up. Month later, 3 of them had sold. The 4th disappeared, just packed up one night and left. No goodbye, no forwarding address. People say he got scared, or got threatened with something worse than financial ruin. Exactly. Martha studied Clara. So why are you still there? Why are you helping Jonah fight a battle he can't win? Because someone has to. Clara met her gaze steadily. Because if decent people keep backing down, powerful people keep winning. Because Jonah stood up for me when I had nothing, and I'm returning the favor. That's loyal, but potentially fatal. Maybe, but at least I'll know I tried. Clara finished her whiskey. I need to know who I can trust in this town. Who'll stand with us if things get worse? Martha considered this carefully. Doc Harrison hates the railroad. They killed his son. Railroad car accident that wasn't quite an accident. He can't fight openly, but he'll help quietly. Same with old Pete at the livery. They burned his first stable years back, drove him nearly bankrupt. He rebuilt, but he remembers. Anyone else? Judge Morrison is honest, which is why the railroad works around him. They've got Judge Clements in their pocket, so they make sure cases go to him instead. Martha refilled their glasses. And there's me. I've been feeding information to anyone who'll listen for years. Hasn't accomplished much, but I keep trying. It's about to accomplish more. Clara pulled out the list she'd made that morning. Jonah needs buyers for his cattle, premium buyers who will pay enough to make direct drives profitable, military forts, mining camps, anywhere the railroad doesn't control the market. Can you help find contacts? Martha's eyes lit with understanding. Circumvent the railroad entirely. Smart. She stood, moving to a cabinet and pulling out a ledger. I've got names, travelers who come through, talk about where they're from, what they need. Never thought to compile them for this purpose, but give me a few days and I'll have a list. We might not have a few days. Then I'll work fast. Martha gripped Clara's hand. You're braver than I gave you credit for. When you first arrived, all refined and proper, I thought you'd wilt out here. Glad to be proven wrong. I thought I'd wilt too, Clara admitted. Turns out I'm stronger than anyone expected, including myself. Jonah returned to find them mapping supply routes and potential markets. He studied the papers spread across Martha's table, then looked at Clara with something like awe. You've been busy. We've been strategic, Clara pointed to the map. Fort Laramie needs beef, so do 3 mining camps in Montana Territory. Martha's got contacts who can introduce you to the purchasing agents. Those are week-long drives through rough country. You've done rough before, and this time you won't be doing it alone. Clara's tone brooked no argument. I can manage the ranch while you're gone. Martha will check on me, and I've learned to shoot well enough to discourage trouble. Clara, that's not negotiable, Martha interrupted. Girl's right. You need to secure buyers the railroad can't interfere with. That means going to them directly. And she's capable of managing the ranch. I've seen what she's done with your place. It actually looks civilized now. Jonah looked between them, clearly outnumbered. This is dangerous. Everything about this situation is dangerous, Clara countered. Sitting still and waiting for the railroad's next move is dangerous. At least this way we're being proactive. He was quiet for a long moment, studying the maps. Then he nodded slowly. All right, but we do this smart. I'll take a small herd first, test the route and the market. If it works, we scale up. When do you leave? Martha asked. 2 days, need to select cattle, prepare supplies. He looked at Clara. You're certain about this? Absolutely certain. They spent the rest of the afternoon gathering information and making plans. Doc Harrison stopped by Martha's under pretense of coffee and quietly offered medical supplies in case of trouble. Old Pete mentioned he had a good horse for sale, cheap, if Jonah needed a spare for the drive. By the time they left town, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced since arriving in this territory. Hope backed by concrete action. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were fighting back. The next 2 days passed in furious preparation. Jonah selected 15 head of his best cattle, while Clara organized supplies for a week-long journey. She mended his spare clothes, packed food that would travel well, prepared medicines for common trail ailments. On the second evening, as they worked side by side preparing gear, Jonah said quietly, I want you to know something. Clara looked up from the bedroll she was mending. What's that? If this goes wrong, if I don't come back or if things get bad while I'm gone, there's money hidden in the barn. Loose board third from the left in the tack room. Enough to get you back east or set you up somewhere new. He kept his eyes on the rope he was coiling. I've also written a letter to my lawyer. If anything happens to me, the ranch goes to you. Jonah, no, I can't. You can and you will. It's already done, legally binding. He finally looked at her. You've earned it, Clara. The work you've put in, the stand you've taken. This place is as much yours now as mine. That's not why I stayed. I know. That's exactly why you deserve it. He set down the rope. When you first came here, I thought I was offering charity. Turns out you were offering salvation. This place was dead before you arrived. Just a man going through motions, waiting for the railroad or time or loneliness to finish what my father's death started. You brought it back to life. Clara felt her throat tighten. I just cleaned and cooked. You did more than that. You gave me a reason to fight, something worth protecting beyond stubborn principle. His voice was rough with emotion he rarely showed. So if something happens to me, the ranch is yours. Not out of obligation, but because you've made it a home instead of just a property. Understand? I understand. Clara blinked back unexpected tears. But nothing's going to happen to you. You're going to sell that beef, establish new markets, and come back to a ranch that's running smoothly in your absence. I hope you're right. That night, Clara lay awake listening to Jonah moving around in the loft above. Tomorrow he'd leave before dawn, driving cattle through dangerous country to uncertain markets. She'd be alone on the ranch for the first time, responsible for everything, vulnerable to whatever the railroad might try in his absence. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt calm, ready. This was what she'd chosen, not safety, not comfort, but purpose, the chance to stand for something that mattered. Dawn came too quickly. Clara rose to find Jonah already dressed, loading the last of his supplies. She made coffee and breakfast in the pre-dawn darkness, trying not to think about how empty the house would feel without his quiet presence. Remember, Jonah said over coffee, anything feels wrong. Anything at all. You ride to town. Find Martha or Doc Harrison. Don't try to handle trouble alone. I remember. You've told me 6 times. I'll tell you a 7th. Your safety matters more than property. He held her gaze. Promise me. I promise. Clara touched his hand briefly. And you promise me you'll be careful. No unnecessary risks. I promise to be as careful as the situation allows. That's not the same thing. It's the best I can offer. He stood, gathering his hat and rifle. Outside, the cattle were already lowing, restless, and ready to move. I'll be back in 7 days, 8 at most. I'll be here. They stood at the door, the moment stretching between them. Then Jonah did something unexpected. He pulled Clara into a brief, firm embrace. She could feel his heart beating steady against her cheek, smell leather and soap and the particular scent that was just him. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything." Then he was gone, striding into the pre-dawn darkness, leaving Clara standing in the doorway of a ranch that was somehow hers now, watching the man she'd come to care for ride into danger. The first day alone passed quietly. Clara threw herself into work, the garden, laundry, organizing the barn exactly the way Jonah had taught her. Staying busy kept worry at bay, and by sunset she was exhausted enough to sleep despite the empty house. The second day brought visitors. Clara was weeding the garden when she heard hoofbeats. She stood slowly, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. 3 riders approached. Not the railroad men from before, but not friendly either. Young men, maybe early 20s, with the careless confidence of those who'd never faced real consequences. She walked to meet them at the property line, acutely aware of the rifle still in the house, too far to reach quickly. "Help you, gentlemen," she called out, keeping her voice level. The lead rider grinned. "Heard Hale's gone. Heard he left his pretty housekeeper all alone out here." He dismounted, still grinning. "Thought we'd check on you, make sure you're safe." "I'm perfectly safe, thank you, and Mr. Hale will be back shortly." Clara stood her ground. "You should leave." "Now, that's not very friendly." The young man moved closer. "We rode all this way just to be neighborly. Least you can do is offer us water. The creek's that direction. Help yourselves." Clara gestured away from the house. "Then be on your way. You always this unfriendly, or just with us?" Another rider had dismounted now. "Maybe you need some company. Get lonely out here all by yourself." Clara's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "I need you to leave, now, before this becomes a situation we all regret." "What kind of situation?" The first man was close enough now that Clara could smell whiskey on his breath. "You going to make us leave? Little thing like you?" "No." Clara's hand moved to her apron pocket, closing around the small pistol hidden there. "But this will." She drew the weapon smoothly, exactly like Jonah had taught her. The men froze, surprise replacing their cocky grins. "Now," Clara said calmly, "I'm going to count to 10. When I reach 10, anyone still on this property is getting shot. Maybe not fatally, I'm still learning to aim, but definitely painfully. Your choice." "You wouldn't." 1. Clara's hand was steady. 2. 3. "Crazy woman." 4. 5. Clara aimed at the nearest man's leg. 6. They scrambled for their horses. The leader looked back once, face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Hale's going to hear about this." "I certainly hope so. Then he'll know what kind of garbage has been trespassing on his land." Clara kept the pistol trained on them until they'd mounted. 7, 8. They rode off at a gallop, leaving dust and curses in their wake. Clara waited until they disappeared over the ridge before lowering the pistol. Her hand started shaking then, adrenaline flooding through her system. She'd done it. Faced down 3 men alone and sent them running. She walked back to the house on unsteady legs and sat on the porch steps, pistol still clutched in her hand. The enormity of what could have happened crashed over her. They'd been drinking, looking for entertainment, probably harmless in their way but dangerous in their thoughtlessness. If she'd shown fear, if she'd backed down. But she hadn't. She'd stood her ground and won. By the time her hands stopped shaking, pride had replaced fear. She wasn't the helpless woman who'd fainted in a town square anymore. She was someone who could defend herself, defend her home, face down threats without folding. Thomas Brennan would never have believed it. The refined Philadelphia lady turning into a frontier woman who pulled guns on trespassers. The transformation would have horrified him. Clara found herself smiling at that thought. The remaining days passed without incident. Clara fell into solitary rhythms, rising with the sun, working until exhaustion, sitting on the porch each evening watching for Jonah's return. Martha rode out on the 4th day with supplies and news. "Doc Harrison heard about those boys," she said, settling at the kitchen table with coffee. Clara had learned to make the way Jonah liked it, strong enough to strip paint. "Says they've been telling everyone in town how Hale's woman pulled a gun on them." "His woman," Clara tested the phrase. "I'm his housekeeper." "Honey, nobody in town believes that anymore." Martha's expression was knowing. Well, you stood beside him against Crane. Well, you're holding down the ranch alone while he's gone. People talk. They've decided you're his woman, whether there's a ring involved or not. That's presumptuous. That's frontier logic. Out here, commitment shows in actions, not ceremonies. Martha sipped her coffee. Question is, how do you feel about the assumption? Clara stared into her own cup. I don't know. It's not like that between us. Isn't it? Martha's voice was gentle. You're living together, working together, fighting together. You chose to stay when you could have left. He trusts you with his property and his future. What else would you call it? Partnership, friendship, mutual respect. All true, but also love. If you'd stop being so stubborn about admitting it. Martha reached across the table. I've known Jonah since he was a boy. I've never seen him let anyone into his life the way he's let you in. And I've never seen you look at anyone the way you watch the road waiting for him to come home. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. It's too soon, too complicated. You can't plan love like it's a social engagement. Sometimes it just happens, whether convenient or not. Martha stood. I'm not saying you need to declare anything. Just maybe stop pretending what you feel isn't real. She left shortly after, and Clara spent the evening thinking about her words. Love. The word felt too large, too dangerous. But what else explained the way her heart had clenched watching Jonah ride away? The way she counted days until his return? The way this place had stopped feeling like refuge and started feeling like home? On the 7th day, just as the sun began its descent, Clara spotted dust on the horizon. She stood on the porch, shading her eyes, watching the speck gradually resolve into a familiar figure on horseback, driving tired cattle ahead of him. Jonah was back, safe, successful, judging by the fact that he'd returned without the cattle he'd left with. Clara wanted to run to meet him, wanted to throw herself into his arms with relief and joy and all the feelings she'd been denying. Instead, she waited on the porch with dignity and tact, letting him come to her. He looked exhausted, dusty and wind-burned and bone-weary, but alive. Whole. Here. You're late, Clara called out as he approached. You said 7 days. Trail was rough, had to take a longer route around some washed-out creeks. Jonah dismounted stiffly. You all right? Any trouble? Nothing I couldn't handle. Clara descended the porch steps. Did you sell them? Every head. Fort Laramie's purchasing agent wants to establish regular deliveries, offered premium prices for quality beef. His tired face broke into a genuine smile. It worked, Clara. Your plan actually worked. Our plan, Clara found herself smiling back. Come inside. You need food and rest. She fed him while he talked about the drive, the challenges, the negotiations, the contacts he'd made. Fort Laramie wanted beef monthly. 2 mining camps had also expressed interest. With regular deliveries, Jonah could make more profit than the railroad had ever offered him for the land. We can actually win this, he said, exhaustion making him unguarded. We can hold on to the ranch and make it profitable without the railroad. Because of you. Because of us working together. Clara cleared his plate. I told you partnership was stronger than fighting alone. You did. Jonah caught her hand as she reached for his coffee cup. Clara, I need to tell you something. Her pulse quickened. What? While I was gone, riding through empty country with nothing but time to think, I realized something. He held her gaze. This ranch stopped being just property when you arrived. It became something worth fighting for. Not just land and principle, but home. And that's because you made it one. Jonah, let me finish. His grip on her hand tightened slightly. I know this started as an employment arrangement. I know we agreed on no expectations beyond work. But somewhere along the way things changed, at least for me. And I think maybe for you too. Clara's throat felt tight. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't want you here just as a housekeeper anymore. I want you here as a partner, an equal, someone who has as much say in this ranch's future as I do. He stood, still holding her hand. I'm saying I care about you, Clara Whitmore, more than I've ever cared about anyone. And if you feel even a fraction of the same, I'd like to explore what that means. Clara stared at him, her careful defenses crumbling. You're exhausted. You don't know what you're saying. I'm exhausted, which means I'm saying what I normally wouldn't have the courage to say. His other hand came up to cup her face. But I mean it, every word. I'm still technically running from a broken engagement. I'm damaged goods, according to frontier standards. You're extraordinary. You're brave and capable and everything I didn't know I needed. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. And if you tell me you feel nothing, I'll respect that. We'll go back to how things were. But if there's even a chance, Clara kissed him. It wasn't planned or graceful, just an impulse she couldn't resist. His lips were chapped from wind and weather, and he tasted like coffee and trail dust and something indefinably him. For a heartbeat, he froze in surprise. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara said shakily, I feel considerably more than nothing. Jonah's smile was brilliant despite his exhaustion. That's good to know. But we should be sensible about this. We should take time, make sure it's real and not just what? Attraction born from crisis? Gratitude dressed up as feeling? He touched her forehead to his. Clara, I've lived alone for 10 years. I know the difference between convenience and connection. This is real. We've only known each other a month. And in that month, you've proven yourself more thoroughly than most people do in a lifetime. His hands framed her face. But if you need time, I'll give you time. I'm not going anywhere. Clara looked up at him. This quiet, stubborn, unexpectedly gentle man who'd given her shelter when she had nothing, who'd never asked her to be anything other than herself, who'd fought beside her and trusted her and made her feel worthy. I don't need time, she said quietly. I just needed courage, and you've taught me I have more of that than I knew. They stood in the warm kitchen, holding each other while evening deepened outside. There would be more battles ahead. The railroad wouldn't give up easily. There would be hard work and uncertain futures and all the challenges of building something lasting in harsh country. But they would face it together, not as employer and employee, not even as friends, but as partners choosing each other deliberately, knowing exactly what they were getting into. Clara had traveled 1,000 miles looking for rescue. Instead, she'd found something infinitely better, the strength to save herself and someone worth standing beside while she did it. In the morning, they would plan their next move against the railroad. They would strategize and prepare and continue the fight for the ranch and their future. But tonight, in the quiet house that had become home, they simply held each other and let themselves feel the beginning of something neither had expected but both desperately needed. Love, fragile and fierce, taking root in unlikely soil. Worth fighting for, worth protecting. Worth everything they'd already endured and everything still to come. Morning brought clarity along with sunlight. Clara woke in her own bed, alone as propriety demanded, but something fundamental had shifted in the night. The house no longer felt like Jonah's space that she occupied. It felt like theirs. She found him already in the kitchen, making coffee with the careful attention he gave everything. He looked up when she entered, and the smile that crossed his face was different now, warmer, more open, everything his usual reserve had hidden. Morning, he said quietly. Morning. Clara moved to stand beside him, their shoulders brushing. Such a small touch, but it sent warmth through her entire body. We need to talk about what happens next. With us or with the railroad? Both, but the railroad first. Clara accepted the coffee he poured. They'll have heard by now that you successfully sold your cattle. They'll know we found a way around their monopoly. Which means they'll escalate. Jonah leaned against the counter. Question is how? They didn't have to wait long for the answer. Mid-morning, as Clara worked in the garden and Jonah repaired fence damage during his absence, a lone rider appeared. Not railroad men this time. This was Judge Morrison, the honest judge Martha had mentioned, looking grim and uncomfortable. Jonah met him at the property line. Judge, this is unexpected. Wish it was a social call, Jonah, but it's not. Morrison dismounted, holding an official-looking document. Railroads filed a lawsuit. They're claiming you harbored a known fugitive, this Jack Morrison fellow, demanding damages and legal fees, plus they want an injunction preventing you from operating your ranch pending investigation. Clara had joined them, listening with growing anger. That's absurd. They already searched the property with a warrant and found nothing. I know, I told them the case has no merit, but they filed it anyway, and legally I have to issue a court date. Morrison looked genuinely apologetic. They're not trying to win, Miss Whitmore. They're trying to bleed Jonah dry with legal costs. Keep him tied up in court so he can't run his ranch or make those cattle drives. When's the court date? Jonah asked calmly. 2 weeks? But here's the thing, they filed with Judge Clements instead of me. Claimed I had a conflict of interest because my son used to work for Jonah's father. Morrison's expression was sour. Clements is in their pocket. He'll drag this out as long as possible, rule against you on every motion, make it expensive as hell to defend. So what do? Fight it or settle? Those are your only options. Morrison handed over the documents. If you settle, they'll drop the lawsuit in exchange for you selling the ranch at their price. If you fight, you're looking at months of legal fees you probably can't afford. Clara felt fury rising. This is extortion disguised as legal process. Yes, ma'am, it is, and it's also perfectly legal, which is the hellish part. Morrison mounted his horse. I'm sorry, Jonah. If there was anything I could do officially, I would. But my hands are tied. After he left, Clara and Jonah stood in the yard staring at the lawsuit papers. The sun was bright and warm, the ranch looked beautiful, and everything they'd worked for was being threatened by men who'd never set foot on this land but wanted to own it anyway. We need a lawyer, Clara said finally. Can't afford one. Not the kind who could fight the railroad's legal team. Jonah's voice was flat. They know that. That's the point. Then we find another way. Clara's mind was already working. Morrison said the case has no merit, which means it's purely harassment. What if we make that harassment public? Make it so expensive for them politically that they back down? How? Newspapers. Public opinion. The railroad's power comes partly from people believing their legitimate business interests. What if we expose their tactics, show how they're using the legal system to steal land from honest ranchers? Clara paced, thinking aloud. Martha has contacts. Doc Harrison knows people. We could get this story in front of voters, make it an election issue. Jonah stared at her. That's brilliant, and also incredibly dangerous. The railroad doesn't take kindly to bad publicity. Neither do I take kindly to being robbed through legal manipulation. Clara stopped pacing. We've tried playing defense. Maybe it's time to attack. They spent the rest of the day planning. Martha, when they rode to town to consult her, was enthusiastic about the idea. There's a newspaper editor in Cheyenne who's been trying to expose railroad corruption for years, she said, pulling out names and addresses. Samuel Wright. He's honest, which means he's poor and probably desperate for a solid story. Give him documentation, witnesses, proof of the railroad's tactics, and he'll run with it. Will anyone care, Clara asked, or will they just see it as one rancher's complaint? They'll care if we make it bigger than one rancher. Martha's eyes gleamed with strategic thinking. Every family the railroad has forced out, every business they've crushed, every dirty trick they've pulled, we document all of it, show the pattern, make it a story about corporate power versus honest citizens. Doc Harrison, when they approached him, offered something unexpected. I've been keeping records, he admitted. Every suspicious accident, every convenient lawsuit, every family that left under pressure. Been documenting it for 3 years, waiting for someone brave enough to use it. Why didn't you come forward before? Jonah asked. Because I'm an old man with a medical practice people depend on. Railroad could ruin me, and then who'd take care of this town? Doc's expression was pained. But if you're willing to be the face of this fight, I'll give you everything I've got. Every piece of evidence I've collected. Old Pete at the livery contributed his own story. How the railroad had burned his first stable and blamed it on his carelessness with lanterns, then offered to buy his land at a fraction of its value to help him rebuild. 3 other former ranchers, now working as laborers in town, quietly shared their stories of harassment and forced sales. Within 3 days, Clara had compiled a damning portfolio of evidence. The railroad's pattern was clear and ugly. Identify desired property, make an offer, then systematically destroy the owner's ability to refuse through legal harassment, economic pressure, and occasionally outright violence. This is enough, she told Jonah, spreading the documents across Martha's table. This is a story that will make people angry, especially voters who don't want to see their neighbors crushed by distant corporate interests. It's also enough to make us targets. Jonah studied the papers. Once we release this, the railroad will come after us with everything they have. Then we'd better make sure we're protected. Clara looked at Martha. Can you get this to Samuel Wright without the railroad knowing it came from us initially? I can try. Got a cousin who travels to Cheyenne regular for trade. He can deliver it anonymously. Martha was already making notes. But eventually they'll figure out who provided the information. By then, hopefully it'll be too public to suppress. Clara's jaw set with determination. We just need enough time for the story to spread. The package went to Cheyenne that evening. Then came the waiting, tense days where every sound made Clara jump. Every rider on the horizon seemed like a threat. Jonah continued preparing for his next cattle drive, refusing to let the lawsuit stop his work. Clara maintained the ranch with fierce attention to detail, as if perfection could somehow shield them from what was coming. A week after sending the documents, Martha arrived with a newspaper. It's out, she said simply, spreading the Cheyenne Leader across the kitchen table. The headline read, Railroad Empire Built on Ashes, How Corporate Greed Destroys Frontier Communities. Samuel Wright had done his job well. The article was thorough, well-documented, and furious in its condemnation of railroad tactics. He'd interviewed other victims across Wyoming territory, woven their stories together with the evidence Clara had provided, and created a narrative of systematic abuse. It's perfect, Clara breathed. It's also caused a firestorm. Martha pointed to a smaller article on the inside page. Railroads already issued a statement denying everything, threatening to sue Wright for libel. But 3 territorial legislators have called for an investigation. The governor's office is under pressure to respond. How long before they know we were the source? Jonah asked. My cousin says railroad men were already asking questions in Cheyenne yesterday. They'll figure it out soon. Martha's expression was worried. You two should be prepared for retaliation. The retaliation came faster than expected. That very afternoon, as Clara worked in the garden and Jonah mended tack in the barn, 6 riders appeared on the horizon. Not Crane this time. These were harder men, with harder intentions written in their approach. Jonah saw them first. He called Clara from the garden, his voice urgent. Inside, now, get the rifles. Clara ran. They'd prepared for this possibility, had practiced what to do if real trouble came. She grabbed both rifles and ammunition, her hands steady despite her racing heart. The men surrounded the house, staying just beyond rifle range. Their leader was the same man who'd come with threats while Jonah was away, older, weathered, with dead eyes that had seen too much violence. Jonah Hale, he called out. Need to have a conversation. We can talk from here. Jonah stood on the porch, rifle visible but not aimed. Clara positioned herself at the window, watching through the sight of her own weapon. Railroads unhappy about some lies being spread about their business practices, unhappy enough to send us to deliver a message. I'm listening. Withdraw your participation in that newspaper story. Sign a statement saying it was all false. Sell your ranch for the offered price and disappear. The man's voice was flat, professional. Do that, and everyone walks away peaceful. And if I refuse, then things get unpeaceful, starting with that pretty housekeeper of yours. The threat was casual, matter of fact. Be a shame if something happened to her while you were out on one of those cattle drives. Clara felt ice flood her veins. Jonah's hands tightened on the rifle, but his voice stayed calm. You threatening her is the worst mistake you could make. Not a threat, a promise. You've got 24 hours to decide. Accept the railroad's terms, or we start making your life very uncomfortable. The man turned his horse. Oh, and that lawsuit? Judge Clements is prepared to rule against you, seize your assets to cover legal fees, force a sale. So you're going to lose the ranch either way. Question is whether you lose it peaceful or hard. They rode away, leaving threat hanging in the air like smoke. Clara emerged from the house, fury overriding fear. We can't let them get away with this. We won't. But Jonah's face was grim. Problem is, they're right about one thing. Clements will rule against me, and I don't have the resources to fight it. Then we make sure the fight happens in the court of public opinion, not just the legal system. Clara paced. That article was just the beginning. We need to make this story so big, so public, that the railroad can't make us disappear quietly. How? We go to Cheyenne. We testify publicly about what they've done. We make ourselves visible enough that harming us would create more problems than it solves. Clara stopped pacing. And we do it now before they have time to act on their threats. It was risky, possibly reckless, but it was also the only path forward Clara could see. They couldn't win against the railroad's money and legal power. But they could win against the railroad's reputation, especially now that territorial politics were involved. They left for Cheyenne the next morning, bringing Doc Harrison's evidence and Martha as a witness. The journey took 2 days, and Clara spent every mile expecting ambush. But they arrived safely, and Samuel Wright met them with the enthusiasm of a journalist who'd found his crusade. The legislature is convening an emergency session on railroad practices, he told them, ushering them into his cramped newspaper office. Your timing is perfect. They want testimony from actual victims. The hearing was held in the Territorial Capitol building, a grand structure that made Clara feel small and out of place. But when she stood to testify, describing her arrival in the territory, her rejection, and everything that had followed, she found her voice growing stronger with each word. She talked about the Marshall search, the dawn threats, the attempted intimidation. She presented Doc Harrison's meticulously kept records. She named names, gave dates, provided documentation for every claim. Then Jonah testified, calm and methodical, explaining the economic pressure, the legal harassment, the systematic destruction of ranchers who refused to sell. Martha corroborated their accounts, adding stories from other families who'd been forced out. The legislators listened with increasing anger. The railroad's representatives, present to defend their interests, grew visibly uncomfortable as the evidence mounted. This is nothing but lies from disgruntled business failures, the railroad's lawyer argued. These people are trying to blame others for their own poor management. Then explain this, Clara said, standing unexpectedly. She pulled out the final piece of evidence she'd been saving, a letter Doc Harrison had obtained, written by a railroad executive to Judge Clements, outlining exactly how to use the legal system to encourage property sales. Explain how this document, on railroad letterhead, describes the precise tactics being used against Mr. Hale and others. The room went silent. The railroad lawyer's face drained of color. Where did you get that, Boop? He demanded. From someone with a conscience, someone inside your organization who was tired of being part of corruption. Clara met his eyes steadily. There are more documents like this, more witnesses ready to come forward. The question is whether the railroad wants all of them to become public. It was a bluff. She had no other documents, no other witnesses. But the lawyer didn't know that, and Clara had learned from the best poker players in Philadelphia how to sell a lie with confidence. The lead legislator, a stern man named Senator Crawford, studied the letter carefully. Then he looked at the railroad representatives with cold fury. Gentlemen, I think we need to have a private discussion about your company's practices and your future operations in this territory. The hearing adjourned. Clara, Jonah, and Martha waited in the hallway, uncertain what would happen next. Samuel Wright was already writing his follow-up story, his pen flying across the paper. An hour later, Senator Crawford emerged. Miss Whitmore, Mr. Hale, the railroad has agreed to drop all lawsuits against you. They will cease all harassment of property owners in your valley, and they will be subject to new regulations regarding land acquisition and business practices. Just like that? Jonah sounded skeptical. Not just like that. In exchange for these concessions, the railroad is receiving certain guarantees about future expansion rights and tax considerations. It's politics, Mr. Hale. Everyone gets something. Crawford's expression softened slightly. But you should know, that letter Miss Whitmore produced made the difference. Without concrete evidence of wrongdoing, this would have been a he said, she said that the railroad would have won. With it, they had no choice but to negotiate. Clara felt lightheaded with relief. So we can keep our ranch? You can keep your ranch, operate it freely, and pursue whatever business arrangements you choose. The railroad will not interfere. Crawford shook Jonah's hand. You two fought well. Most people would have given up. Most people didn't have as much to fight for, Jonah said, looking at Clara. They stayed in Cheyenne one more night, partly to ensure the agreement was formalized, partly because they were both too exhausted to travel. Martha returned home to spread the news, promising to tell everyone who'd helped that their courage had mattered. In their modest hotel room, they'd gotten 2 rooms for propriety, but sat together in one talking, Clara finally let herself believe it was over. "We won," she said wonderingly. "We actually won." "You won." Jonah took her hand. "Your strategy, your courage, your brilliant bluff with that letter. I would have just kept fighting and losing. You changed the battlefield entirely." "We did it together." Clara squeezed his hand. "Everything we've accomplished has been together." Jonah was quiet for a moment, studying their joined hands. Then he said carefully, "Clara, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." Her heart quickened. "What?" "When this all started, you stayed because you had nowhere else to go. Then you stayed because you were helping me fight. But now the fight's over. You're free to make any choice you want, go anywhere, do anything." He met her eyes. "What do you want?" Clara had known this question was coming, had been thinking about it since the hearing ended, since she'd realized they'd actually secured their future. She could go back east now, could use the money from her work to establish herself somewhere civilized, find a teaching position, resume the life she'd thought she wanted. The thought held zero appeal. "I want to go home," she said quietly. "Where's home?" "The ranch, with you." Clara moved closer. "I know we haven't known each other long. I know this started unconventionally. But I've never felt more myself than I do working beside you. I've never felt more valued or respected or genuinely loved than I do in that little house in the middle of nowhere." She took a breath. "So if you're asking what I want to stay. Not as your housekeeper, not as your employee, but as your partner, your equal, your wife?" Jonah's voice was rough with emotion. "Because that's what I'm asking, Clara. I'm asking if you'll marry me. Not because it's expected or proper, but because I love you. Because I want to build a life with you, face whatever comes next together, and make that ranch a home for real." Clara's throat tightened with tears she didn't try to hide. "Yes. God, yes, I'll marry you." He kissed her then, gentle and fierce simultaneously, and Clara felt everything she'd been through, the rejection, the humiliation, the fear, the fighting, crystallize into this single perfect moment of choosing and being chosen. They were married a week later in the small church in town, with Martha and Doc Harrison and Old Pete and everyone who'd helped them as witnesses. Clara wore a simple dress she'd made herself from fabric bought with her own wages, and she'd never felt more beautiful than she did standing beside Jonah, speaking vows they'd written together. "I promise to stand with you," Jonah said, his hand steady holding hers. "In good times and hard ones, in success and struggle. I promise to value your strength, respect your voice, and never ask you to be anything other than exactly who you are." "I promise to choose you," Clara responded, her voice clear. "Every day, deliberately. Not because I need rescue or security, but because partnership with you is the greatest adventure I can imagine. I promise to fight beside you, trust you, and build something lasting together." Judge Morrison, who'd agreed to officiate, smiled as he pronounced them married. The kiss was chaste enough for public consumption, but held promise of everything to come. The reception at Martha's Cafe was loud and joyful. The entire town showed up, including some of the people who'd witnessed Clara's original rejection. Thomas Brennan wasn't there. He'd married someone else, apparently, someone appropriately frontier rough. But Clara didn't spare him a single thought. As the evening wound down and she and Jonah prepared to return to their ranch, Clara found herself on the cafe's porch looking at the town that had first seemed like the site of her greatest failure. "You thinking about that day you arrived?" Jonah asked, joining her. "I was thinking about how certain I was that my life was over, that being rejected meant I'd failed completely." Clara leaned against him. "Turns out it was the beginning. Everything I thought I needed, status, security, someone else's approval, I didn't actually want. What I wanted was this, choice, partnership, a life I built with my own hands." "You think you would have discovered that without Thomas Brennan's rejection?" "Honestly, probably not. I would have married him, been miserable trying to be what he wanted, and convinced myself that quiet desperation was all I deserved." Clara turned to face Jonah. "Being rejected was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it forced me to find my own strength instead of relying on someone else's approval. Thomas Brennan's an idiot." "Thomas Brennan did me a favor." Clara smiled. though I don't think I'll be sending him a thank you note. They rode home under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, the prairie spreading vast and dark around them. The ranch appeared as they crested the final hill, small and sturdy against the enormous landscape, lights burning in windows that welcomed them home. Inside, everything was exactly as they'd left it. Clara's garden tools by the door, Jonah's rope coiled on the hook, coffee set up ready for morning, the ordinary details of a shared life. "It's not much," Jonah said, looking around. "Not compared to what you could have had back east." "It's everything," Clara pulled him close. "It's ours. Built by our work, defended by our courage, chosen deliberately instead of accepted by default. That makes it worth more than any mansion in Philadelphia." That night, in the small bedroom that was finally truly theirs, Clara lay beside her husband and thought about the journey that had brought her here. 1,000 miles on faith and desperation. Public humiliation, crushing uncertainty, hard work that had reshaped her hands and her understanding of her own capabilities, and somehow, impossibly, it had led her exactly where she needed to be. Not with a man who wanted her to be smaller, quieter, less, but with a man who valued every difficult, complicated, fierce part of her. Not in a life that demanded she diminish herself to fit, but in a life that expanded to accommodate her full humanity. She'd been told she was too refined for frontier life. Too good. Too much. Turned out she was exactly right. Exactly strong enough. Exactly brave enough. And the man sleeping beside her had known that from the moment she'd sat on her trunk in a dusty town square, with her dignity intact and her future uncertain, refusing to let rejection define her worth. The ranch prospered. Jonah's cattle drives became regular and profitable, establishing the kind of business the railroad couldn't interfere with. Clara's garden grew into a productive operation that supplied not just their table, but Martha's Cafe and others in town. They hired help eventually, young men looking for honest work, families needing new starts, and the ranch expanded from a one-man operation into something approaching a real community. The railroad kept its word about non-interference, though Clara suspected their compliance had less to do with honor and more to do with the ongoing legislative scrutiny Samuel Wright's articles had generated. New regulations limited how corporations could acquire property, and several railroad executives faced investigation for their tactics. Justice, Clara learned, was imperfect and incomplete, but it was something. 2 years after their marriage, Clara stood in the garden she'd reclaimed from weeds, watching Jonah teach a young hired hand how to gentle a skittish horse. The boy was maybe 15, recently orphaned, rough around the edges, but desperate to learn. Jonah was patient with him the same way he'd been patient with Clara, offering knowledge without judgment, expecting effort, but allowing mistakes. She'd been right about Jonah that first day, Clara realized. He was exactly who he'd appeared to be, honest, steady, surprisingly gentle despite his rough exterior. What she hadn't known then was that she was also exactly who she'd needed to be, even when the world kept telling her otherwise. The garden was beautiful, full of vegetables and herbs, and even some flowers she'd planted just because she liked how they looked. It was practical and ornamental simultaneously, useful and lovely, exactly like the life she'd built. "You're smiling," Martha observed, having ridden out for coffee and gossip the way she did most weeks now. "What's so amusing?" "Nothing. Everything." Clara gestured at the ranch, the expanded barn, the new outbuilding, the cattle grazing in the distance, the house with its fresh paint and real curtains. "I was just thinking about how different my life is from what I imagined when I stepped off that stage." "Better or worse?" "So much better it's almost funny." Clara poured coffee for them both. "I thought I was coming here for a husband and security and a defined role. Instead, I found work and purpose and partnership, everything I actually needed instead of what I thought I wanted." "You ever regret it? The hardship, the fighting, the danger?" "Not once." Clara sipped her coffee. "Even the worst moments taught me something valuable about my own strength. I wouldn't trade that knowledge for any amount of comfortable ignorance." Martha smiled. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think Thomas Brennan did this whole territory a favor by being too stupid to see what he had. Because Clara Whitmore, the Philadelphia lady, might have been fine. But Clara Hale, the frontier woman, is magnificent." Clara felt her eyes burn with unexpected tears. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Just truth. Martha raised her coffee cup. To being exactly who we are, regardless of who thinks it's too much. To being too much, Claire echoed, laughing, and loving it. That evening, as sunset painted the valley gold and purple, Clara and Jonah sat on their porch in the rocking chairs she'd mended and he'd refinished. The workday was done. Dinner was finished. The ranch was settling into nighttime quiet. Happy? Jonah asked, his hand finding hers between their chairs. Clara thought about the question seriously. She was sunburned and work-worn. Her hands were calloused, her dresses were practical rather than fashionable, and she lived in the middle of nowhere doing hard labor every day. She'd also never been more content. Deeply happy, she said. Are you? More than I knew how to hope for. Jonah squeezed her hand. You changed everything, Clara. This place, my life, my understanding of what partnership could mean. You did the same for me. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. You gave me space to discover who I actually was instead of who I'd been told to be. That's the greatest gift anyone's ever given me. They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge one by one. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. The wind moved through sage and grass with its eternal whisper. The land stretched vast and unforgiving around them, but this small space they'd carved out together felt like the safest place in the world. Clara thought about the woman she'd been, refined, proper, desperately trying to fit into molds that would never accommodate her full self. That woman would have been horrified by Clara Hale, with her sunburned face and capable hands, an absolute refusal to apologize for taking up space. But that woman had also never been truly happy, had never known what it felt like to be valued for strength rather than compliance, had never experienced the fierce joy of standing her ground and winning. Sometimes rejection was a gift. Sometimes the people who didn't want you were actually showing you the path toward people who would cherish exactly who you were. Thomas Brennan had called her too refined, too good, too much for frontier life. He'd meant it as condemnation. He'd actually given her the highest compliment possible, confirmation that she exceeded his limited ability to appreciate her worth. And now, sitting beside a man who saw all her complexity and loved her not despite it but because of it, Clara understood the profound difference between being chosen from convenience and choosing each other from genuine recognition. This was home. Not the house, though she loved it. Not the land, though she'd fought for it. But this partnership, this mutual respect, this daily choice to stand together against whatever came. Home was wherever someone knew your worst and best qualities and valued both equally. Home was wherever you could be entirely yourself without apology. Home was here, in this moment, in this life she'd built from rejection and courage and stubborn refusal to accept other people's definitions of her worth. Clara Whitmore had traveled 1,000 miles looking for a husband and security. Clara Hale had found something infinitely more valuable, herself, unmuted and undiminished exactly as she was meant to be. And that, she thought, as Jonah's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm, was the only happy ending that had ever mattered. Not rescue, not romance, just the radical, transformative act of claiming your own life and living it on your own terms with someone brave enough to stand beside you while you did. The prairie stretched endless around them, vast and challenging and beautiful, just like the future they would build together, just like the woman she had become. Exactly right, exactly enough, exactly, perfectly herself.